Christian, thank you so much for joining us. It's a privilege and above all, a great pleasure to meet you once again. And on behalf of this group, we are very grateful for your generosity in sharing your precious time with us. And of course, we are above all, really excited to be here with you, to listening to you. And so please feel very welcome. This is a group composed by business and thought leaders of many of Brazil's leading companies. Most of them are at the C-level and on boards of directors. And under this leadership program, we are debating critical issues every month. And on top of that, we have these special sessions with leading thinkers like yourself, who are, our guides to think better about all these subjects, and of course, to act accordingly. So, Christian, since we are recording this session, let me make a quick and informal introduction of yourself to all the members of our group. So Christian is the founder and leading consultant at Semco Style Institute and an associate professor at the California State University at Fresno. And he was an independent consultant for the Morningstar Company, which is one of the largest tomato processors in the world, and one of the pioneers as well in self-management practice since the mid-20th century. And he has been a visiting scholar at Stanford University and also a researcher at the University of Fribourg. And Christian's interests include, applying agile, Scrum to education, self-managing teams, learning environments, developing people-centric cultures, the future of work, and so on. So, Christian, as we talked before, perhaps we can kick off this conversation with your presentation. As far as I remember, it's titled, Self-Management, How to Get There, with your experiences both from Semco and from Morningstar. So, and then we can move to a Q&A with all the members of our group. Sounds good?
Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you for this great introduction, Alex. It's a pleasure to be with you all here, and maybe to get this conversation started, what I'd love to hear from you in the chat is, where are you at in terms of this journey towards self-management? Is that something you're already doing, or is it something that you just want to learn a little bit more about? If you could share a little bit about that in the chat briefly, that would be great. And that helps me as I speak with you, that helps me kind of guide what I talk more about and what maybe I talk a little bit less about. Well, so here is my goal for today for you, right? And Alex also, and we talked about it. It's really, as a professor, I'd like to provide a little bit of theoretical foundation and share some learnings of my research. But this is really a focused on the practice that I do and when I work with companies, because I think that's probably what you guys are most interested in. That's my angle, right? Hopefully you walk away today after this hour to having learned something practical, something that you can apply, and something that is also inspiring to you. Just real quick, right? My background is, as Alex said, I'm from Switzerland, from Fribourg, which is a French and German-speaking city in Switzerland. And I got really lucky to get a scholarship to go to Stanford to finish my PhD in 2009. And then I stayed in America. My wife is from California. And I started, because of my research, I got in touch with this company, Morningstar. And, I was an external consultant for them for a little while, and I'll share with you a bit more about this experience. And then I started the Semco Style Institute in the US in 2020. And what we do with this institute is we consult and we do training and organizational development for companies that want to have a more human-centered approach to management and to leadership. And some of my areas of research are, how can organizations foster the human potential development? What kind of organizational development is needed for the future? And how do we develop leaders and the teams in such organizations, right? That's what I'm interested in. And that's what originally brought me to this work. Maybe some of you know the self-determination theory by Dici and Ryan. And long story short, what they say is there's basic psychological needs that need to be satisfied, right? My background is in psychology. And I studied this in the Swiss manufacturing industry and looked at levels of autonomy, of competence, and then of relatedness, right? Sometimes people speak of relatedness as purpose, but I looked at how do all of these relate to hope? And the hope means how can I make my life better and how can I change my life, right? So that's the belief of an individual. And I was featured in this book by Shane Lopez, who was a senior scientist for the Gallup Institute. Maybe you've seen surveys from Gallup, which typically they talk about the engagement surveys and how terrible it is, right? And also in the book
Christian, about a
Yes.
month ago, we talked with Jim Clifton, the CEO of Gallup. This was about a month.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, great. So, and so that's what they're interested in too, right? How to measure all this. But what I'm interested in is how do you affect it, right? How do you increase engagement? How do you increase the happiness of people in organization? And how do you also improve the performance of organizations? There's another book that I can recommend, Drive, that talks about motivation. And actually, many of the theories that Dan Pink describes in there, we used in our research in the mid-2000s when we looked at the Swiss manufacturing industry. So why a virtuous company? And maybe that's a question for you all. Why do you want to do this? And I'm curious about, maybe you can put in the chat, why do you want to do this? Why should a company do this? Right? Maybe many of you says, oh, duh, it's obvious, right? Probably
It's a deep question, Christian.
Right. So that's why, to me, I just have a short answer. You know, for me, a democratic organization is a virtuous organization, and I think it promotes hope in people and in the society in general. So a little history of organizational design, right? If you know the classical history of org design, starts with the train station development, and then the railroads, right? They had to organize a lot and across different time zones. So this is from a train company, and then on the right you see General Motors, right? And actually, General Motors is a very interesting company early on. They organized, in silos, but they also had a lot of aspect of decentralization, right? So that's really interesting. But I don't want to go deep dive into this. But those just as some examples of big corporations, right? And they worked really well. And some of them still they serve a purpose, right? They function, right? But they're also a artifact of their time. Right, and a lot of the things that they did back then, we can do much easier now. For example, with information technology, right? Sharing information was an important function of the hierarchical pyramid, right? Relaying information back and forth between people, and now we can easily connect directly with people. Just as an example. So why do you want to have a more agile organization, more flexible organization? Well, you might have heard of this, the VUCA world, right? Things change faster, there's more uncertainty, right? There's more ambiguity, and we develop ourselves in a more complex space. And the American military actually has come up with this VUCA terminology because of the war on terrorism, etc. But we could just talk 1 hour about all this stuff. However, what I think everybody realized is at the latest since COVID, that a little thing like a virus, right, can throw the whole world upside down, right? And then it really comes down to how do you adapt? How do you organize? How do you survive in a business environment like that? Not just physically, but for your business or for your organization in general. All right. So these are some of the reasons, and now also the future, right? What do you expect, right? There's a lot that we don't know, but one thing that we probably know for sure is that things are going to be changing, right? And things probably change faster and faster, right? For example, you guys probably seen ChatGPT, this AI thing. I mean, that exploded within like a few weeks, right? Now everybody's talking about this, and it's kind of interesting how these things evolve and how fast they evolve. Long story short, I'd like to share with you this citation by Darwin. And that's a point as well, right? How can we be responsive to change? So the American military has answered with an idea of team of teams, which maybe some of you have heard. General McChrystal wrote a book about it, right? Again, that emerged from that VUCA environment. And you kind of see how the typical military structure is command and control, right? They went to command of teams and then teams of teams, right? So you see how it's more of a networked organization and more of the future of our organization. Some other examples are maybe Spotify, right? Maybe you've heard of it. This is just an example of it, of an alternative design where you have different squads and tribes and trios and alliances and guilds, right? And now it's different, right? It always changes, and this is just a snapshot. But to give an example of how companies evolve and figure things out, and then a small company out of Sweden all of a sudden is a multi-billion company that competes with Apple Music, Amazon Music, right? The other guys, Sony and who else is in the business, music business, are kind of second thought now, right? Because Apple and Amazon just overtake all these guys. But Spotify came out of nowhere and is able to really place themselves as well in this industry. And I think part of it is because they figured out how to organize, how to collaborate faster, better, and provide results that are attractive. With the Semco Style Institute, we have a transition approach, right? We talk about there's a hierarchy, right, on the very right, where you have a lot of command and control. You have the power plays that happen there, right? And most of the motivation is actually extrinsic, right? And a lot of the research that I did was about how do you develop intrinsic motivation, right? How do you develop hope in the workplace? And to go from hierarchical to just a network is really hard, right? So one intermediate step is to have a more participative work environment where we start flipping the pyramid, right? And I think that might be something that many of the speakers that you have talked about more, servant leadership, creating a culture where employees come first, focusing on having a healthy culture, well-being, etc. And then on the very right, you see really the organization as a network, right, where it's much more agile. Motivation is intrinsic, and it's more of an ecosystem approach. Okay. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this here with some examples. So, yeah, I'll keep talking. I'll try to hurry up because I'm eager to hear your thoughts and questions. But this is an example of self-management, right? A flight of starlings, right? The birds, how they coordinate and fly around. There's no bird in charge, right? There's many little birds are taking on leadership roles, and then they adapt and take turns, right? So it's a complex adaptive system, as an example. So the first story, I want to tell you two stories. One is of Morningstar, actually three stories. One is of Morningstar, one is of Semco, and then the other one is of a client in California that I'm working with now. And that way you get a little bit of a spectrum of different companies. The Morningstar Tomato Company is the biggest tomato processor in the world. It started with one truck, and the truck was leased, right? So there's one guy, his name is Chris Rufer, he developed this company, and at the beginning of the 90s, he had some epiphany as a leader of a company. He was signing checks, right? Bills, and signing checks. And he said, you know what? What if I don't want to pay this bill, right? Well, this is already agreed. They already have a contract. The supplier is already on the way. I have to pay this, right? So, maybe CEOs think that, hey, I'm the boss and, I have all this power. But at the end of the day, he realized I have to do a lot of this stuff no matter what, right? So he said, you know what, it's time to change this. So he decided to create an organization that has no bosses, and it's totally informal, only individual agreements between the different people in this company. There is a hierarchy though, right? The hierarchy is based on competence and also based on social reputation. Right. So when people say Morningstar is completely flat, it depends what they're talking about. There's no formal hierarchical power where somebody can tell somebody else what to do, but there's clearly people with more influence and less influence. Right. And it's a highly successful company right now. The annual sales are getting close to $1 billion from a leased truck. And I wanted to share a little bit more with you about how do they organize it. In 2010, 11, or 12, I forget when exactly, but about 13 years ago, Chris Rufer got an award from Gary Hamel, that started a management innovation lab, and actually wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about Morningstar. And that is the world's most creatively managed company. And when this came out, before, there was a rather unknown company, that just focused on processing tomatoes. And before you know it, a lot of people, maybe such as yourself, said, "Oh my gosh, I'm trying to do more alternative ways of organizing, more human-centered ways of organizing." And when they read this in the Harvard Business Review, a lot of people started reaching out to Morningstar. And Morningstar had already started the Self-Management Institute, which was first mostly an initiative to learn together with other companies. And then it became also more of educating other people about how they operate and how we do the work that we do. The institute doesn't exist anymore, right? But for a while, I was external consultants for them and would help companies do a transformation towards more of a Morningstar-oriented model. So how does Morningstar work? Two basic principles. One is you cannot use force, and the other one is keep your commitments. And those two are boundary attractors that create a strong boundary for what you can do, what you can't do. Okay, it's very elegant. So it's total freedom, but also total responsibility, right? And the philosophy you see, I put this in the background. By the way, is the Declaration of Independence from the United States, right? It starts, "We the people, all created equal," etc. So there's a really deep philosophical meaning there as well. And it's really about providing autonomy to people as well. So you might say, okay, what happens after this, right? It's really important to amplify both freedom, but also responsibility, right? So the Morningstar is a very high performance culture, right? Expectations are very high, freedom is very high, and the results are also very high. I compare it to this. On the left, you have when you have rules and regulations and and the policies, right? And on the left, you have guiding principles, right? So what we try to do is install guiding principles to really help individual actors coordinate, right? When you see these cars in the roundabout, they have to think about how I am interacting. But what happens is the throughput, right? The performance of this roundabout is much higher than if it were a traffic light. Are roundabouts popular in Brazil?
Yeah. So it's not, of course, as popular as traffic lights, but yeah, it's increasing as in the US. And I really like this metaphor, Christian.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So in the US, still the traffic light is still the predominant thing, and it's like, oh my gosh, the roundabouts are so much better.
Yeah.
Faster, more environmental friendly, right?
Yeah.
And create more flow, right? And that's what we're trying to do, to create better performance, better flow, healthier for the environment, right? Lower cost, etc. This here is how, in addition to these principles, the mission is what guides the colleagues at Morningstar, right? And what we call it now is mission-focused self-management, because a lot of people say, oh, we are a self-managed company, but Morningstar, we want to be specific about how do we actually, how do we differentiate ourselves? So there's a Morningstar vision, right? To realize the capability of each human being to flourish, treat others with human respect, and to productively work together to advance the well-being of mankind. Right? That's the vision, right? The enterprise mission is to add value for others. The business unit mission is to add value to the enterprise mission, right? And then, so that's the organizational level. And you can see it's really general. It used to be much more focused on tomatoes and the tomato industry. And now it's more broader. Right? It also shows how Morningstar evolves as an organization. But what's important is that each colleague, each person in this company has a personal commercial mission, right? The purpose at Morningstar, right? And then the personal mission is to be happy, whatever that means for you. Right? Mm-hmm. Again, the pursuit of happiness is a big thing for the US founding fathers, right? So I think it's also inspired by that. And then again, you see here, right? The agreements, there's a little bit more to it, but fundamentally it's about keep your commitments, and don't use force. So respect other people and keep your commitments to everything you agree to do. Then there's a lot of more tools for business education. How do you write these agreements between people? How do you do analysis of business processes, the continuous improvement? There's there's education for colleagues, how to run a business, right? So there's a lot more to it, but this is the foundation, and a lot of it comes directly from that. There's a whole conflict resolution process, right? Where we say you can't, because we say no use of force. So basically also means you can't just fire somebody, right? You got to have a process in place to let somebody go.
And Christian, how many employees more or less do they have nowadays, Morningstar?
So year round, it's around 400 people. And during the season, it's around 2,500 people and sometimes even more. So when the tomato season, right, you got to harvest, you got to work in the fields and etc. So there's a lot more. And I'm glad you asked. The retention rate of the seasonal employees is around 97 to 98%, right? So those are people, and in California, some of these people go back to Mexico or other countries, and then they return to Morningstar because this is really their preferred place to work.
Fantastic.
So how do you create such an innovative organization? Now I want to segue over to the Semco and the Semco Style Institute, which is a part of a global network, right? Originally from Semco. There's nobody in Brazil right now, ironically, but the original company is there, right? And I'm still in touch with some other people. But Ricardo Semler, and I don't know, maybe show a quick of hands. Who knows Ricardo Semler of you? Oh, many of you. All right, that's great. That's great. So Ricardo actually moved to California about a year and a half ago. So unfortunately, not in Brazil anymore. Ah, there you go. Yes, yes. Great. So I thought you guys, being Brazilians, you'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about this as well. So we're a network that's around the world, right? So we have an institute in the US and I'm in the US and Canada, and then our team, but there's an institute in China, in India, in Europe, etc. And I won't spend too much time on this if you know him, but basically, for those who don't know Ricardo, he inherited the family business from his parents, and he started working there, and then just felt like, hey, it was too bureaucratic, it was too hierarchical, and he started trying to make the organization more democratic. And he wrote 2 books about it, Alex just showed, right? And it was also featured in the Harvard Business Review, and there's also a lot of business results that came with it. So the company in the beginning was around 100 people, and then at its top was over 5,000 people, right? So the growth was enormous, but it also took a while for them to build this. And what I want to show you here is the theoretical foundation that the Semco Style Institute came up with. Right, so the people in the original Semco company were invited into a workshop with social scientists to really distill the theory and practice behind all this, right? Because remind you, right, Semco, they didn't have, they just created it, right? They were inspired by other companies too, but basically it was like an innovation lab, right, to build a company that's democratic. And that was the main purpose for a long time, to just create an organization that is more focused on people, more participative, and to see how far can we push this. And Ricardo was really a great advocate of that and a great champion, right? So him as his father had passed away, so him as the champion in the organization, and maybe that's interesting for you as well if you're a board member or a CEO or a leader, right? He had a lot of power within the organization, and he chose to give that power to different people. Right? Again, I don't want to be too theoretical, but one thing that I think is really important to understand is that it's fundamentally based on trust, right? And that's, I'm sure you guys talked about this already in terms of a virtuous company, but I tell people or people are interested or potential clients to say, well, the first thing you have to agree to is to base your organization on trust. If you do not want to do that, then it's going to be very hard to apply this model, if not impossible. Right? So there's some things that you can do, some practices you definitely can do, but the really powerful aspects just come out when you trust the people. And so we have this model where we break this thing down, right? Make it applicable trust. What does that mean? Well, everybody has a good sense, but then we say, all right, first of all, it means treating adults as adults. Then we want unfiltered transparency, and we want to reduce the power distance, right? So those are 3 elements that we found lead to higher trust. And then we have practices for each of them. And I'll show you this in a moment. I'll go into more details, but we have practical practices for each of these elements that you can use to build trust, right? So what the Semco Style Institute has done is has collected all the practices that Semco has implemented and documented them and made them readily available in an ecosystem. We also have, an area for alternative controls, for self-management, how to create extreme stakeholder alignment. Sorry about that. And then how do you get creative innovation, right? And I think of it as a circle, right? It's all of this together, and at the end you get the entrepreneurship, the continuous experimentation, right? That agility that many companies are looking for is a result of doing other things. It's not, we don't have a creativity of chief creativity officer, right? We also don't have a chief diversity officer, right? It's how we organize the company that is creating diversity, right? How we organize our meetings with democracy is creating inclusion, right? It's not a title of one person that does that, right? I think it's, and we don't make a big deal about it, but I think that's what makes it so powerful.
And I really like the idea that it is an invitation to reflect upon the subject instead of, a recipe.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the name of the style too, right? The Semco style means it's not like the Toyota way where this is the way, right? It's the style. And you look at this and take what you like, right? And then see how you can make it fit. And so with the Semco Style Institute, we continuously add practices to this as well, right? It's something that's alive, that continually evolves. And it's working with people. It's great to see how they bring it to life and come up with their own things, right? And at the same time, it's really helpful for people who are on this journey to have very specific, concrete things that they can do, right? And they can try out. So what's interesting is that the original people from Semco, they were there was a long debate about, hey, can another company even learn this, right? And I asked many times, well, how many other companies in Brazil do this? Because that's where you're from, and why would not many do this? I don't know. I'm curious. Does anybody of you know a Brazilian company that has implemented the Semco principles or was inspired by Semco?
Not exactly Semco's methodology or practices, but there are some companies, of course, far from being mainstream, companies that do not have a hierarchical pyramid, that they have, some concentric circles, and that they are more, let's say, horizontalized. I mean, it's flat companies. There are a few of them, but of course these are the exceptions.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, we see Gustavo has a hand up.
So, Christian, I do. Thank you. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. So, but I think maybe my question is exactly this. So, Ricardo, create this, sold millions of books. Everybody is excited. Right? He became famous. But reality then, nothing really happens. So I maybe want to get your view, from more your experience and not being so close to this. Is this like more nice to have? Everybody would like to, but you know what? Maybe for my neighbor, not for me. So just maybe trying to get some of your view on how people tackle this and why we don't progress overall, or maybe we do at some extension, but we don't see it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. Yeah, why not more people adopt this? I have some hypotheses and some experiences, but I don't know. It's to me it's very obvious and it's a no-brainer, right? But it's also not easy to do. It's hard, and I'll make a few comments about this as I move on. And then I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it. That's really, you guys are out there in organizations as well, and I'm curious what you hear. So one question that we get a lot is, well, how do you do this, right? And as the Institute, we've developed a roadmap that's more of like imagine like a treasure map, right? A treasure hunt, right? You don't necessarily go every step right after another, right? You can go different steps, but there is some things that should come first and others that should come later, right? So for example, the first phase is preparing the fertile ground. The second phase is where we really work with teams and with leaders, with management to help with self-organization. And then the golden circle, the outside, is the self-direction, where you get more entrepreneurship and you also get more of a startup-like culture where people branch off and etc. Many companies can be super happy when they just go into the blue phase. They will benefit very highly from that. But if you take it to the next level, it's which is even more involvement of people. You get where one gentleman of from Brazil, he told me from the original Semco was saying, you know, when they get really excited, they start flying and you have to pull them down. You have to calm them down and, you know, don't get too excited, right? And I have seen some people react like that, so it's great. So I want to show you really quick 3 phases. I got to hurry up a little bit because I have a lot that I want to show you. So first of all, it's getting started, right? Prepare the fertile ground. What can you do in the beginning? Then I want to show you a little bit about the team. How do you work with teams? And then I want to show you also the leadership. And I really like to call this the digital and democratic leadership mindset, because it, you know, maybe Gustavo, to give a little nugget, to me, it's not just if you don't want to do this, or is it nice to have, you're going to have a Spotify come and get your business if you don't do it. That's how I start thinking of it, right? Or other than that, the millennials, right? I don't know exactly how the millennials are in Brazil, but the millennials in the US, a lot of them, they want to have a fun workplace. They don't want to just do what somebody tells them all day long, right? They want to be more involved. So people are being a little bit more demanding, which I think is right. So I want to show you these examples with a case study from the aerospace industry. And this is a manufacturer that is a supplier to SpaceX and Boeing and Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin. So they have to do very high quality and complex products, right? If something goes out in space, it better work, right? Otherwise, you're putting a whole mission in jeopardy. And why this might be also interesting to you is this particular company has a lot of women involved, and has also a lot of Latinx immigrants, right? So some of the people are maybe I don't know how many of you are in manufacturing or work with a lot of less educated people, right? I think this is a really interesting group of people that are hard workers, but sometimes, for example, many of these people didn't know how to use a computer, right? Or maybe they don't know how to speak English so much. So I think it's I don't know how it is in Brazil, but maybe there's also some relationships to that in certain areas of if you work in industry and with factories.
And Christian, if I may add, on the reasons to become more decentralized and making use of the collective intelligence, I just saw yesterday an interview with the CEO of Michelin, the tire maker from France, and they started a huge project that they call responsabilization, which would be responsabilization or accountability or something like that in English. And when he was asked about the reason for starting such a huge transformation, he said, look, I simply came to realize that this company would not live another 100 years with the same structure and mindset as from the previous 100 years. And so they were simply stagnated without innovation. And so they had to try something bolder, and just to add to your point.
Yeah, exactly. I really enjoyed that. I heard about what they did at Michelin. That's great. In France is also pretty, being from Switzerland and close to the French and speaking French, the French culture is pretty autocratic, in the company. And so it's great to see that. And that's another thing maybe for us to think about too, is that there is this movement of the entreprise libérée, the liberated enterprise in France. And why do we, I don't know if you have it in Brazil, but we don't have something like that in the US. And although the US is much more, everybody talks about freedom and liberty, and et cetera, right? So it's interesting. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how do you prepare the fertile ground, right? A lot of this is education of leaders, like maybe read a book, see a TED Talk, but maybe groups like this, right? To just hear more about it, kind of get more curious and see, oh, there is something else. But then I'm talking here in terms of an engagement with the client, right? The first thing is for us always think about how is the organizational design, right? And how might we redesign it? But it's not us telling the client how to do it. It's just us bringing ideas and principles and then co-create this with the organization. And some of them want to do it and some don't. That's okay, right? But typically the structure of the organization is very important, right? So long story short, Alex, you just mentioned concentric circles. That's exactly what we do. Also, we focus on multidisciplinary teams, right? And if you look at the original Semco, the way Semco did it, they had, hold on. The original Semco started growing, right? First, it was more participation in the Semco as a manufacturer when it started. And then as it started growing, it became a network of companies, right? All right. The other thing, what we do is playing games, business simulation, right? So we have a game that we play with people. It takes about 6 hours, where the people play a company, okay? And there's a total of 6 days in the life of this company. There's the customers, there's workers, there's supervisors, there's managers, right? And they have the company's goal is to serve the customer, right? And the first 4 days of this company's life, they are a traditional hierarchical company. And the last 2 days, they are a Semco style company, right? And so the people experience directly what the difference is in their, just their life, and also the experience how the customers are more satisfied. So it's a great way. See here at the end, the team gets actually paid, right? So they're happy about that. And it's a great way to engage everybody to say, hey, here's what we're trying to do, right? It is a feeling, experiential learning, and also they already see some principles, right? For example, the customer, this is their customer. He was, in the beginning, he always had to talk to the manager and supervisor and never talk to the people that do the work. And at the end, he's talking directly to the people, right? But there's a lot of other things, changes that we do as well, but it's a great way to get people started and get everybody on board, right? It's important to get everybody involved. The other stuff that we do that's a little bit more high tech is a simulation. That this is a collaboration also with Mark Carr. He is the guy that wrote the book about the submarine, and a really great way of how he led a submarine in a more democratic way. And this is a VR simulation of how do you lead a submarine, and then all kinds of stuff happens. So typically at the beginning, you don't even come out of the harbor, right? You already die, and it's a cool experience for teams, especially also leadership teams, right? They realize, oh my gosh, I can't control everything. All right, then we do team development, and I'm just going to show you one step out of our roadmap. Right, this is step 4. When we work on distributing decision-making power to the teams, right? There's more steps to it, but this is how we start. And okay, this is a little bit more theoretical, but remember how I said trust is crucial? The whole time, it's all about just finding out. I always start with trust, with also with these guys who played the game, right? First, we talked about, hey, what's the levels of trust? And the game is there to build more trust between people. And theoretically, we nowadays psychological safety as a term is really popular, right? Probably you guys have heard of that. And so we tie into some of that research as well, right? How can we increase psychological safety? How do we deal with mistakes, right? What happens when something goes wrong? The other part also is to connect the people to the customer focus and the sense of purpose, right? So for example, here this is like at 6:30 in the morning. A few weeks back, we will watch a launch of a rocket by SpaceX. Maybe you guys have seen it. They have a newest, biggest rocket, right? And this is something that sometimes companies overlook, is to really highlight how we serve the customer. What's the purpose of the customer? This case particularly, without revealing too much the stuff about NDAs and so forth, SpaceX wants to do more rockets and they want more launches, right? So they want to go from 60 to 100 launches, right? But first, what management was telling the people is like, hey, our customer wants to go from 4 weeks delivery time to 2 weeks delivery time, right? And that's okay, that's cool, but that just means, hey, oh my gosh, we gotta work faster, we gotta figure stuff out, right? What I did is brought them together and say, look, explain why does SpaceX want this, right? And you're part of this mission. You are part of this bigger venture, and it's important for us to help them to be able to launch their rockets. And right, and now the context is different, and now everybody is also involved. Everybody thinks about this. It's not just a bunch of managers or engineers trying to figure out how do we cut this down. Then we have a framework called the boundaries for action, right? So and this is specifically self-management. It doesn't mean chaos. Actually, quite the opposite, right? It means more control, because everybody knows more, understands more. What's the purpose? What are our goals, right? And we have this framework where we focus on very clear results and keep it simple, right? But some KPIs of what do we want to focus on. Then also, what is the quality that we expect? What are laws and regulations that we have to follow, right? It's not us telling you that, it's the law of the land. And then we have behaviors. This is some stuff is HR stuff with no sexual harassment, all that common sense stuff, right? That you unfortunately is not always common sense. But then much more details is, how do we treat each other in the team, right? How do we want to communicate with each other? How do we go about when somebody's late, right? How do we go about when somebody has a low performance, right? So the people come up with this. This is an example of a team.
Christian,
yes.
I find this fantastic, because you define very clearly the parameters in which people are going to have the freedom to operate, right? So instead of trying to a very narrow, set of parameters, let's make them clear, but at the same time, as broad as possible, and with some room for perhaps flexibility depending on the issue. And so, as you mentioned, it's not chaos. It's actually you have a more control, but at the same time, potentially more engagement, because people will own this, inside this framework.
Yes, exactly. Like Alex, it gives, right? You see, this green is the area of freedom, right? So you have goals, and that's what the difference is between the blue phase and the golden phase. In the blue phase, management still gives goals, right? Or the board gives the goals, right? And then the team executes those goals. In a golden circle, the team themselves might set goals, right? Maybe they say, in terms of this company, might say, hey, we don't want to just be a supplier for SpaceX, but we want to also become a supplier for Airbus. How do we do that, right? As an example. So we want to be really clear on what, right? The goals, really clear on their boundaries, and then people can have a freedom, right? And you see here, this is an example of co-creating with the teams, right? And so everybody understands much better of what can I do and what can't I do. And also people like, the quality manager is a little bit relieved, right? Because he said, oh my gosh, okay, I see now. It's not just chaos. People can't just do whatever they want. They still have to follow these policies because, aerospace industry, for example, has very, very specific policies and also regular audits, right? So it's a very controlled environment, but still we want to try to give people as much freedom as we can. and then teach the numbers, right? We want to share results and share a lot of information, teach numbers, and then see how do we reach our goals? What do we, right? And this for these guys, that was very new, right? So we had to also we share information and educate people about it, right? And then get people used to talking about it. That's a big piece as well. Then this is an example of creating the team boundaries, right? We said this is an exercise to do with people about, you know, they're on a sailboat and they have an island and they got to decide, you know, what's our goals for our team and how we're going to get there, right? And this was, for example, these teams, that was in January when we did that. And just this week, we're in June, we're doing a retrospective and see, hey, how are we doing on that, right? I meet with them, I coach them regularly, right? And now it's kind of a time to say, all right, let's go back. How far along have we come? And it's very impressive on how many things people are working on when they, you know, when they use tools like this, right? They're more creative and it's fun, right? They enjoy doing it. And it also helps then regulate conflict. Then another element, and this is, you know, just some tools, some strategies. How do you make decisions in a team, right? Some people say, oh, democratic management is about voting. No, you don't always have to vote. And not everybody has to vote, right? It's like in a democracy too, right? Sometimes you vote for a delegate, right? And then they are in a committee and then they figure it out, right? And some stuff, we want to have a super majority, right? Important stuff, we want everybody involved. For example, with this client, they decided to go to a schedule. It's called a 980 schedule. So instead of working 5 days every week, they work 9 days. So every other week, they have a long weekend, right? So people love that, right? Now, but some people didn't want that, right? So they had to vote about it, and then they had to convince each other, no, it's better, right? Then they did a pilot at just one plant first, and then they did other plants as well. But that's that. And if I can give you one nugget, really practical, is to work with consent, right? To not say everybody has to agree, but are we okay to move forward? Yeah. What's the worst that can happen? Is there any strong opposition? If no, let's move forward. I use that a lot in coaching with leaders to say, hey, don't, even if you want to be participative, right? Sometimes maybe we do too much, right? So there's little tricks where you say, hey, I open it up for discussion, but at the same time, we can't discuss everything for hours and hours, right? We got to be quicker too. Let me see here. All right, then I just started talking about it already, but the leadership development, one thing is, and maybe that echoes, Gustavo, your question from earlier, how can you be in control without being controlling? Because I think a lot of the hesitancy to do this is people are, you know, if you're a CEO or a board and you're responsible for results, sometimes it's hard to let go, right? Sometimes you can't really delegate that well, and then to say, okay, now you're talking about self-management. Oh my gosh, right? Where are we going with this? So one thing is to really help the managers become more coaches, right? And that's already, a lot of people talk about this, but to really provide autonomy and then to coach that autonomy, it's easy when everything goes well. It's super hard when things don't go right. And that's when I want to also share some failures or some learning experiences that happened just 2 months ago. You know, I was on a vacation with my family at the beach, right, trying to relax a little bit. And I get a text and say, hey, you know, call me. And one of the managers say, oh my gosh, you know, we had a big miss in our numbers and I'm not sure what to do, right? Because we're sharing numbers with the people and it seems like nobody else cares. It's just me, right? And I got to go to the CEO and then the CEO, you know, ask me tough questions. And I'm like, well, shoot, right? And so we had to go back and really also talk to the whole group of people and say, well, if it's not fair that, you know, you guys get a lot more freedom, but it also comes with responsibility, right? So where is the gap, right? But then also for me, it was really interesting to hear, I heard a manager's story, right? But then I hear the people's story, and it's not always the same story, right? So sometimes managers also need some coaches or some other external people to go in and be able to hear what they don't tell each other, right? And that's where I think I can see how the transformation is not so easy. It takes a lot of interpersonal skills.
Well, Christian, let me please just try to complement on this, because this interview that I mentioned about Michelin, one of the things that was more interesting is that he said that they only managed to move forward once they explicitly managed to deal with the fears and anxiety of the managers. So they created sort of forums in which managers could express their fears. What are your fears about all of this transformation process? And also dealing about their anxieties, because otherwise they would kind of root for things to don't go on well. So they could say, look, the old way is the right way of keep doing things.
Right. Yeah, the fear, it's definitely important to address the fears and also address the opportunities, right? Because the same manager, right, a month later was like, I said, hey, you're what we found out is too involved, because she was trying to save they have monthly goals, and then it was maybe week 3 that she would start intervening and moving stuff around, and the team was like, screw it, you're talking about giving us autonomy, but then when we have our plan, but then you come and mess up our plan, right? So say, all right, well, let's do an experiment. Manager, you're not allowed to intervene, even if it goes bad. You're not allowed to intervene. Let these guys do their thing, right? And the manager then was like, also experienced that was very stressful, but at the same time also relaxing, because she was able to say, you know what, I'll let them do their thing and then go from there, right? And long story short, it's still a work in progress, but you can see how when you don't really let go, then you're in between, right? And that's the hard part. But the people also need coaching, they need certain responsibility, right? I also had to talk to them and say, hey, you guys, do you want to go back to the old way where people just tell you all the time what to do, or do you want to take on responsibility, have more freedom, right? And say, no, we want to stay like that, right? We'll figure it out. And so the other example is the one I share with you is with another manager, not in another plant, they had to do they had a large order that came in, right? And they had to decide, how do we do this? Do we do overtime or how? And the people say, oh no, they're all, a lot of them are mothers and have other stuff to do, right? And they said, you know what? No, we don't want to do overtime. They got together, they figured out how to get it done, and they had the freedom to get it done the way they wanted it to get done, right? And they got work done that normally, and check this out, work that takes them normally 2 months, they figured out how to do it in 2 weeks. Right? And then they had time to do more training, more cross training, to build up the capacity of other people, right? So now we have a much stronger team, and they're ahead of their schedule, right? Mm-hmm. So now you have I don't know how many of you are in production, but you have a much more relaxed team, right? But then here's also some levers to pull with leaders, where we coach leaders, right? It's about how to boost team performance, right? So how do you facilitate the problem solving of teams, right? How do you develop the psychological safety? How do you stimulate the ownership of the team? And then one thing, intervene only when it's really sought, right? At the same time, in the beginning, you got to kind of be there, right? It's not just the child and you let them go in the open road, right? And here's what's interesting for the manager: the role changes, but if they have their skills too that they can bring along, right? Managers, they don't just are there and command and control people, right? They have skills that they bring to the table. So how do we become more of a teacher, right? And teach other people these skills. And my selling point to managers is, your life will be much more relaxed, right? And you'll have time to focus more on what's really important. It's, what does the future bring? Where are markets headed? What are our customers want, right? So where do you spend your time? And then we also do a lot of organizational learning across different sites, right? To bring people together, to reflect together, to learn from each other, right? Also managers share experience, share fears with each other, right? And sometimes these meetings can be tough as well, right? Because they're like, hey, I have this and this problem. How do you deal with it, right? So again, right? Hey, what's going well? What could be better? What should we stop doing? What should we start doing? Retrospectives like that. And I have some more stuff to share with you, but I guess one of the main questions for you today is, how will you continue your journey? And I have some time for Q&As. I don't know how long of time we have, Alex, but
well, perhaps if you can stick with us here for about 15, 20 minutes, we'd appreciate very much, so we can have some questions here from the members of our group. And I'm going to kick off, Christian. I'd like to compliment Gustavo's question, because, first of all, I find it incredible that Semco has started in Brazil, and nowadays it's so difficult to have companies in Brazil, interested in I would say innovating not only on products and services, but on the way they organize themselves, which is critically important. So, but my question is, what are typically, the main barriers for this kind of cultural transformation, so companies can become more, trust-based, horizontal, and how much time does it typically take to carry out this process of transformation, of organizational transformation, to move from this vertical to this more, I would say, decentralized and people-centric organization? If you could please share with us your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So the barriers, I think, typically in the beginning, it could be at the top of an organization, right? The ownership, the CEOs, could be the management C-level. It could be middle management. It could be the lower management, right? It could be a workforce. Right? It could be, resistance can be everywhere. I think what's really helpful is if you have a strong champion at the very top, right? So if you have a business owner say, "Oh, we're going to do this, no matter what, we're going to do this," right? That's helpful. And then it's all about facilitating the process in the sense of where people understand where are we going, what are every journey is unique, but that's what I like about Semco Style Institute is with the roadmap we have. It makes it a little bit more specific, right? You can see, all right, there's a plan, there's a method to the madness, and we've done this, a bunch of times now, and so we know, okay, fears with managers. When Miceli said that, yeah, definitely, right? You want to address that, and you kind of know what's going to happen. And you anticipate it's still going to happen, and there's always surprises, but you can, if you know it, you can address it better, right? And then it's really about the human development as well. So it's the ego of the leaders, it's the ego of the workers, it's the ego all across the organization. It takes a human development piece, right? So I think that's something that sometimes people overlook. It's not just about leaders letting go and getting out of the way. It's also workers or people in lower levels of the hierarchy stepping up and wanting to be involved and having a say, right? So it's like when you create a democracy, right? The US has tried to put a democracy in various countries, and that doesn't typically not work, right? People need to want it as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to hand over to Antonio, but perhaps later, if you can complement Christian by telling us, how do you see incentive systems and the turnover? Because perhaps these are also two barriers, depending on the incentive systems in place and the managerial turnover or employee turnover. People do not have a great, long-term commitment with their organization, with their teams. So they are more likely just to keep doing the same things as always, because they really don't want to invest to enjoy the fruits of this effort on a long-term basis. So maybe later, but Antonio, please go ahead.
Thank you. Christian, thank you very much. Very interesting. And maybe just before my question, a very quick comment. My impression is that we didn't have followers of Ricardo Semler when he wrote that, because it was a bad timing, meaning that it was too early. He was, let's say, well ahead of his time. And at that time, changes were very lengthy, no innovation, no disruption. I think nowadays, the ground is much more fertile for this cultural change than before. So perhaps that could explain a little. But my question really is, when you presented the Morningstar case, I was puzzled because with my bias, I tended to think that with less educated employees, that would be much more difficult. And I'm assuming that in that kind of business, you could have a lot of less educated people. So tell us, I mean, is this a higher challenge or is applicable and also doable?
Yeah, it's muted, Christian.
Sorry, that's a very good question, Antonio. I think it really depends on the people that are in that company, right? Dedication doesn't matter as much as the character is maybe not the right word, but if they want to be involved, right, they will then get the education, right? It's kind of like some people, they just want a job. In the US, we say 9-to-5 job and that's it. That's hard, right? But that could also be with more higher educated people, right? Or let's say to echo Alex, your question, if I'm a manager and I know, hey, I'm going to go to this company for a year and then I'm going to get a better job over there, right? They're going to be like, they're not interested. This is more of a long-term project, right? I do think that it's helpful when people have good communication skills, right? When they're able to express themselves. Also, if they have good emotional intelligence, is very helpful, right? But with Semco too, in the very beginning, we have a whole video library, by the way, that is accessible. They talked about, you know, people they would have meetings and people didn't talk. Everybody was quiet, right? So they first had to get people to talk and develop. And so in that sense, Antonio, I think if that's related to education, then yes, it takes a little while. I think now the schools are doing a much better job in the US of having, you know, collaborative learning experiences, collaborative working. And that's what we need more of, right? To know how to work with other people, how to resolve conflict, how to say things when you don't get along. And I do quite a bit of that as well between, you know, support conflict management, also conflict management training.
Fantastic. Roberto, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christian. I would like to follow on Antonio's question and talk about the profile of the team, right? Did you see in your study any correlation between companies that have succeeded implementing this model and a certain kind of traits or a profile of the workforce, the team, or this model could be theoretically implemented in any company with any workforce profile? Do you see any traits that, for example, if we work with HR and we pass some orientation to HR, look for these traits, these characteristics for the new hires, so that our journey can be more successful in implementing this model? Did you come across something like that?
No, I haven't, but that's a good question. I think for example, how we do hiring is very much team-based, right? So the teams would hire other people, and then, you know, we want to have diverse. I think any industry, anybody can do this. That's my conviction, right? But if you have, I mean, what I probably look for is high egocentrism, that's going to be hard. if your HR gives an egocentrism test, that, yeah. Other than that, it's a really good question. But also with Morningstar, we found when some of the managers came to us from other food companies, they would be there, and then they couldn't deal with it. They were used to giving commands and authority, and then they had to leave again, right? So maybe one thing is too, what are people experiencing, and and are they open to working another way? That's maybe one thing that I would ask when hiring. And the way Semco hires, what we recommend is for people not just one interview and hire, but have several interviews, and then even do an internship, go work there for a little bit, and see how people get along. Right?
And Christian, just before handing over to Angela, just complementing Roberto's question, because he asked about some evidence, and I think it's an important message that the current model is not working very well, because it sends the idea, things are okay, and let's not risk the way things are nowadays. But when we see, for instance, engagement levels are very, very low, right? We're talking about 20%. We have a lot of mental health problems in the business world, a lot of lack of self-motivation and sense of meaning, and the idea of that the jobs are not meaningful for many, many people. That's why, we have this book, for instance, Bullshit Jobs, in which about 40 to 50% of people in the UK and the Netherlands, and we're talking about the UK and Netherlands, saying that they don't feel their jobs are really something that it's relevant for humanity. So perhaps, I don't know if you have some evidence on the improvement in terms of engagement, mental health, collaboration in companies that move it toward this, I would say, not only people-centric, but more respectful of human dignity, in the sense of models that are aimed at unleashing people potential, unleashing people to flourish, to become their best versions, and not limiting them. And then Angela, sorry, Angela, I just keep it ahead of you, sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you hear very good studies, I'm trying to search for this as well and really document it. There's some of it, right? And I think a lot of the literature in organizational psychology points to that. But I think it would be great to have more research to be done in this field.
Yeah. So Angela, but perhaps in companies that you have worked with, if to notice this, but just
Yeah, no, I notice it, but I at this point we have an assessment that I can show you guys, where we see that we measure trust, and we try to see how trust increases. But we haven't, that's something that we want to do more of it, like systematic studies of what is the impact of it.
Great.
Oh, Christian, thank you so much for being with us. My name is Angela. I coordinate this program with Alex, and it's an honor to have you here. And my question is about diversity. And since the first book of Ricardo Sandler, he already addressed his concern about diversity, about how companies lack in women and other kinds of diversity. And my question is, well, if with this democratic process, so my question is, how do you prevent the biases of these groups, of these democratic groups, to overcome the process? Because all of us, we have biases, of course, but when it's concentrated in the HR, we can mitigate this process in some ways. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with mitigating the biases when it is a totally democratic process with people? Do you address that? In what way?
Oh, Angela, wonderful question. So are you talking about for example, when we hire or when we make certain decisions?
Yes, when you hire, and also when you assess people, and also when you thinking about a promotion, who to promote, we have already a lot of biases.
I don't know that we have necessarily a solution for that to eliminate the biases. I think when you have a more participative culture, the decision making is more shared and more team-based, and it's more transparent, right? So for example, I don't know if you guys know, but we have also a process to have self-set salaries, right? So in order to have self-set salaries, you got to make more information available to employees of what are other salaries, right? So how do you compare to others? It's not like you say, oh, I want to have $1 million, right? It's something that's realistic, right? So, and that helps, particularly women and minorities. That is very helpful because now they see what everybody else makes. And so that automatically takes care of things, right? In terms of the salaries. In terms of like promotions and stuff like that, a lot of times it's we do that with team-based decisions, right? So if a team, you know, if they elect the team leaders, for example, right, or they get to say if they don't like somebody, right, you give feedback to for the supervisor, for the manager, and if managers get bad reviews on a regular basis, well, guess what? It's going to be hard for them to have a team, right? So. But then, you know, if those groups themselves have biases the way they decide or group think, you know, that's still a problem that I think doesn't easily go away.
And what about hiring? Because each group they can decide who they hired, right?
Yes, and again, it depends on, you know, how each company is a little bit differently, right? But like if I would say, hey, here's what you should do, right? It's the team that needs help that hires them, right? And then HR is more an advisory function, right? So maybe as an HR professional, you coach the people, hey, you know, first of all, here's a question you can ask, here's what you can't ask, right? And then help them be professional about eliminating biases. And then also, you know, sometimes people like to hire people that are similar to them, right? We kind of know that from research, right? And maybe that's something to share with employees as well, right?
Exactly. That's why. Why.
Yeah. And so it really takes maturity as well. But that's what makes me passionate about it, right? It's human development, human potential development at all levels, right? And some of the problems go away because just the way it's designed and the way that people interact, and other problems are the same, right?
Fantastic. And Celso,
thank you.
Our last question, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Christian. And so I just want to hear you, if you could elaborate a little bit more, you know, like you have behind you this shaping the future of the work, but is it so that the people is not prepared today? Because you mentioned that, you know, it is not only the management letting go, but also the people, the workers, they need to want this and the step up, or people need to be open to work in another way. So what comes before, you know, making the change? What is needed for or this is going to be another polarization subject, you know, people that works like this and people that doesn't want and will follow another way. What is your view about that, you know?
Oh, my view is, I've learned this from Ricardo last year when we had a session for we have an expert program where we teach people over 16 weeks how this works, right? And leaders, some of them are leaders, some of them are consultants. But a similar question came up, right? And he said, well, what if not all the managers want to do this, right? Because we believe in choice and we believe in freedom, right? And actually, we've done this with a client of ours in Netherlands, in a big bank, right? And there's one department, right, with 3,500 people that said, we want to do this, right? One division. And the other divisions, they kept doing what they are doing, right? But the CEO said, you know what? To that VP, is the vice president, he said, if you want to do this, go for it. This is your problem, right? But right, so there was some freedom there, right? So they have a pocket of autonomy, and then this guy, he then said, no, we want to do this with different branches, and they give them a lot more autonomy to people how to open their banks, etc. But the interesting thing is this: the management style can be also flexible, and I'll tell you this as a little Celso, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
I'll tell all of you a little secret because he's here. I think the future has all kinds of organizations, and the future, when you are in a network, will have different pockets, right? And Celso, if you have a guy, ex-general from the Brazilian military, that is really good, but he's a hierarchical guy, but he has a team of other military guys who like to follow orders, well, you got a pocket that works, and you can leave him alone. Right? And the guys that don't like that, they move to another pocket, and they go in an environment where they was more participative, right? Right. So it's, I don't know if it's paradoxical, but to give the freedom of autonomy to also choose to do command and control, if that's what people like, right?
Fantastic. It's fantastic insight. Celso is a CEO of a Finnish company. It's a subsidiary in Brazil. So he knows the Finns. I don't know if the Finns are more command of control or more democratic. So Celso, I think you have options there. and Christian, just out of curiosity, before ending here our session, is Ricardo still active? Do you still get in touch with him on a regular basis?
Yeah, so he's more retired, so he's not really involved in the day-to-day. But every once in a while, he'll be in a session or give some advice. And one thing that I wanted to show you guys real quick is this, because I think you guys need to know about it. We have an ecosystem, and we have a lot of videos from Brazil, from the original company, from Semco. And I don't speak Portuguese, so we have subtitles. But I think for many of you see here these videos. So Angela, to your question, for example, this here is the HR manager from Semco, right? And so, for example, just a video from welcome people on board, right? So if I go on this,
right,
testimonies from these guys.
Oh, fantastic.
And I'll just put one real quick because I'm interested in Portuguese reaction to this.
Eu sou Fernanda Lobato e eu trabalho em recursos humanos, sou gestora da área. Agora eu vou falar um pouco como que é o processo de integração dos novos funcionários. Primeiro, existe a integração com recursos humanos, então é ali que são passados os detalhes sobre a empresa, até simples detalhe de mostrar onde é um toalete, onde ele toma café, porque no primeiro dia a pessoa ela chega completamente perdida, né? Ela não sabe aonde pisa. E aí as práticas da empresa, como que é a divisão das áreas, e falo também sobre o grupo Semco, as unidades de negócio, e explico um pouco mais como que qual que é a estratégia da empresa em relação a produtos, a mercado de atuação e, principalmente, focando mais na cultura organizacional. Então, falar sobre o manual de sobrevivência, que ali estão todos os valores, né, que são praticados. E, após essa integração, a pessoa ela vai para a área. Existem 2 modelos. Algumas vagas, a pessoa ela já vai direto para a área dela de atuação, né?
I don't want to go too long with it, but you see that you can really hear how the company develops it, right? How certain practices are being done.
But are these videos open for us? Because
yeah, so the thing is, this is an ecosystem that's a paid ecosystem. but there's maybe we can work on some if there's interest in the group, because I feel like this is some of it, you see, there's all a little bit of older people here also involved, right, from the original Semco. But I think for people in Brazil, to hear it in Portuguese, and it can be really convincing, right, and really helpful. And we have a whole resource centers with that. We have the let me show you this here. We have a whole toolkit, right? So when, for example, I remember I talked about trust, right? Let's say we talk about reducing the power distance to build trust, and then you can see all these practices, maybe for the board members of you, live board meetings, right? To have it live where everybody can see it, right? Or we have CEO rotation where the CEOs is just 6 months and then it's out. It's another guy or another lady, right? Or be on the board once and then you can see, okay, well, how do you do this CEO rotation, right? Oh, you see, it's hard. It's a hard practice, but why would you do this? And we have a menu of why do you do this? How do you do it? What are some do's and don'ts, right? What are some pros and cons? And so it's a way to learn about each practice. And then you choose what you want to do, right? It's not a consultant telling you, hey, here's what the company should do. The company themselves choose what they want to do.
Wow.
And for those who are interested, maybe I'll share with you a link to a webinar. We have a webinar next week where we actually in 2 weeks where we talk about our assessment report, right? And maybe that's interesting for people in HR and stuff, where we see, hey, let's say you want to know the level of trust, right? So we have different questions and maybe, okay, let's say I feel equal to my colleagues, right? Or the company goals and results are clear. And that's for any company, right? And if you look at this, we actually have a team view, right? Where you can see what do different people say. And then you can have this as a starting point, say, I'll check this out. This is the CEO of this group. This is his whole leadership team, right? So the CEO, he says, yes, it's clear, right? But you see here, this guy, Chris, Ahmed, they're not too sure what is going on, right? And as just as an example, this is a great way to start. They did this before a retreat, right? So even if a traditional company wants to do something and move towards more human-centered design, right? You don't have to have everybody involved at the very beginning, right? You can start with your leadership team and be more participative there, and then tackle other things later on.
Wow.
All right.
Sounds great. It's a complete toolkit. Thank you so much, Christian. For sure, we're going to take a careful look on that. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So Christian, I just would like to know, on behalf of this group, to deeply thank you once again for your generosity of taking your time to be with us. It was very, very exciting occasion for us, really memorable, a true privilege, and also would like to see you once again at some point in the future. I think this just starts a conversation, because for sure these issues, they will keep with us for the years to come, right? On senior management teams, on boards of directors. So we're really looking forward to see you once again in the future. So thank you so much. It was great, wonderful.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to spend some time with all of you, and all the best. And hopefully I'll try to reach out over LinkedIn and see if we can connect there. And yeah,
fantastic.
If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. See you, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, folks.